to protect the house. Days later Daisy arrived, a small but brave dog. From the first night, Daisy planted herself in front of my aunt's room and didn't move. She seemed to know there was something to protect. One night, shortly before my cousin was born, I stayed to sleep there again. In the early morning, I was awakened by a loud noise. The branches of the trees were beating against the tiles violently, as if a storm was about to break, but the air was strange. Motionless, Daisy began to bark. Fury, fury, and instantly I heard someone trying to open the bedroom door. I jumped out of bed and hugged my aunt, who was barely waking up. The doorknob turned as if someone on the other side was desperate to get in. Daisy barked, and her barking turned into a threatening growl. That's when I heard footsteps, but not on the ground but above, on the roof. They were slow, heavy, as if someone were walking on tiles, and by now my rib ached, it burned. The noise stopped suddenly when my uncle opened the bedroom door. Upon entering the hallway, the lamp, everything was silent. Daisy stopped barking and stayed looking at the ceiling, motionless, as if she could still feel what I also felt. That thing hadn't gone away completely when my cousin was born and moved. The figure disappeared completely. We never saw it again on the wall or felt its presence, but I never forgot those eyes or that feeling of being in front of something that shouldn't exist existed, and I understood that my ability wasn't just any ability, that it was a warning, a door to what others couldn't see and that I wish I hadn't seen either. It wasn't the last time I had an encounter with those evil witches. Years later, when I went to university, I moved abroad to study in Spain. There I met the one who would eventually become my husband, and last September we got married. Since I hadn't seen my family in years since I left, we decided to spend a few weeks here in my country. My relationship with my mother's family was distant, especially after my parents' divorce and because they didn't agree with my marriage. They said I had married too young, so we decided to stay with my father's family, who lived in a small town surrounded by forests and mountains. We arrived and the whole family welcomed us with open arms. The first few days we stayed at my aunt's house, but after a few days a cousin of my father invited us to stay at a farm that was farther from the town. Both my husband and I thought it was a very good idea, since there were relatives there whom we hadn't seen due to the distance between the farm and the town. However, upon arriving, I noticed that this road was really isolated. It was rough. There was no lighting, and although the farm had electricity, the atmosphere was oppressive. The cold there was much more intense than in the town, and the wind made the trees move in a disturbing way, as if something invisible were pushing them. Yesterday, despite that, the first day was pleasant. We went for a walk with the family and talked about all sorts of things. At night for dinner they started telling stories in the place, they wanted to scare my foreign husband. And one story that immediately caught my attention was the legend of a woman who roamed the mountains. They said this woman stalked children and devoured them, that she walked on four limbs with very thin, deformed extremities that allowed her to move with a terrifying speed, almost as if she were a spider. Her unmistakable sound, a heavy sound as if claws were tearing through the damp earth. They called her the Sarrow Witch. While listening to that chilling story, that story immediately reminded me of my own encounter with a witch when I was a child. Last night, at night, luckily they slept soundly. The second night hell began. I was awakened by a noise outside. Outside it was moving in the mud, crawling. It was strange and irregular, if something heavy was walking. It moved with difficulty. It didn't sound like a dog or any animal I knew. The mere fact of hearing it made my nerves go on edge. It was then that I felt a twinge in my right rib. That burning I had experienced on other occasions throughout my life, and I knew very well what it meant. Something was wrong. It was going wrong. The following nights continued. The worst thing is that they seemed to get closer and closer, as if whatever was causing them was gaining confidence night after night. The pain in my rib didn't disappear either. On the contrary, it was getting more intense. One of my aunts noticed my tired appearance and asked me what was wrong. I told her about the noises and the burning in my rib. She was silent for a moment, thoughtfully, but she didn't say anything. A day later, my husband and I went to the town to say goodbye to the family. They lent us a truck for the return trip, but we got delayed. Night caught us on the way back, and, to make matters worse, that old vehicle broke down in the middle of the journey, in the darkest isolated part of the road. We had no choice but to walk to the farm. We turned on our flashlights and started walking. At first, everything was quiet. My husband and I talked and joked to relieve the tension. However, at one point I noticed that he stopped and looked at something behind me. His face changed, he turned pale, and his eyes reflected terror. "What's wrong?" I asked. Although deep down I already knew the answer, the burning in my rib was unbearable. There was something behind me, something that shouldn't be there. Before I could turn to Look, he took my hand tightly and whispered in a trembling voice, "Run." It was then that I heard the sound, the same heavy, shuffling footsteps I had heard at night. Now they were right behind us, moving, getting closer, following us. We ran as fast as we could, but I couldn't help but turn around in a moment of desperation. And there it was, a grotesque figure, naked, with gray, disheveled hair falling over a cadaverous face. Its limbs were incredibly long and deformed, bent at impossible angles. Its skin was grayish and cracked as if it were made of dry mud, and worst of all were its empty eyes again, small, fixed on me as if it knew something I didn't know. Its way of moving was unnatural, twisted, acidic, and each step seemed like a dry crack that echoed in the darkness. We reached the farm almost at a run. My husband closed the iron gate and we both ran into the house. The family was awake. They came to us alarmed to see us exhausted. We told them what had happened. While we were talking, a terrible sound interrupted the silence of the night. Someone or something was trying to open the gate. My uncles and cousins came out with machetes and a shotgun in hand. From inside I heard a shot followed by a deep silence. At that same moment, the burning in my rib disappeared completely. Later they confirmed what I feared. They told me that was the Sarah witch. My uncle said she had tried to climb the gate with those deformed limbs and the shot had hit her that night, and yes, my aunts, who were believers, performed a cleansing on my husband and me, but I couldn't stop wondering what that witch wanted with me. The last time I faced one, it didn't make sense. I was just a child and she was looking for the baby my aunt was expecting, but now there was no reason. A week later, back in Spain, I found out. But I understood, I was pregnant. That witch knew it even before I did. That's why she stalked me every night, that's why she chased me. She wanted my baby. To those who have listened to these stories, I want to thank you for taking the time to learn about what I've experienced. I know perfectly well that my experiences may seem impossible, but they are as real as the air I breathe. These are not just memories. They are warnings. They are scars that I carry with me. I have learned that evil doesn't always present itself as a big monster from fairy tales or a shadow in the darkness. Sometimes it's hidden in the cracks of everyday life, waiting for the right moment to show itself, in short, to reveal itself, and when it does, it's usually too late. But I also learned that there is good in the world, that there are people who are willing to protect us from the darkness. And I learned that even in the face of fear, we must be brave and face our fears. I hope that my story can serve as a warning to others, so that they can be more aware of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. Thank you for listening. Or it does, or it leaves these marks on us that never go away. What I faced in my childhood made me fear and respect what we don't understand, but what I experienced years later taught me something even more important. It taught me to protect what I love with every fiber of my being. That which knew my baby was coming before I did myself, and in her greed she tried to take it away. From the experiences I've lived, my encounters with the paranormal, because these have not been the only ones, I felt that pang in. Let me tell you something. Remember to never ignore that pang inside you, that feeling that screams at you that something is wrong. Sometimes it's the only thing that can save you. Your intuition, your instinct.